the Christian Forum on Israel-Palestine. Today's conversation is with Ori Hanan Weisberg, an Israeli Jew who lives in Jerusalem. Ori earned his PhD in English literature at the University of Michigan. He served in the Israel Defense Forces. He has taught in the US and Israel, worked as an editor and translator. It's published in the Times of Israel, the Forward, Haaretz, the Washington Post. And we should add soberly that one of Ori's friends was wounded and then taken prisoner by Hamas in October 2023. We've invited Ori to join us today to talk about how he and other Israeli Jews are experiencing and reacting to the massacre and hostage-taking of October 7th and to Israel's devastating military campaign inside Gaza that has persisted now for almost 2 years. Welcome, Ori. We're so grateful that you're spending time with us from Jerusalem.
Thank you for having me.
And welcome to, and welcome also to my colleagues around the table, Rob Dalrymple, Ross Wagner, David Crump, Gary Burge. Michael Thompson couldn't be with us today. Ori, to jump right in, you are remarkably fearless on social media. Last time I checked, you had 17,000 followers on Facebook. I don't know if you knew that. You engage your fellow Israelis directly, many of whom push back hard. Some regard you as treasonous. Your replies to them can sometimes be profound essays of reflection, all of which reveals for us, the lurkers, the sharp divisions, the trauma, the fragility of Israeli society. Let me quote from your post from August 6th recently. You were reacting to a new poll that found that 79% of Israeli Jews are, quote, not so troubled, or, quote, not troubled at all by the reports of famine and suffering among Palestinians in Gaza. You wrote, and I'm quoting you, "This is the story, not the bogeymen of Netanyahu or Smotrich or Ben Gvir or any of the other extremists. We are consenting, actively or passively. Even begrudging and shrugging acceptance is endorsement and complicity." In another post, Ori, you distinguish two groups within Israel. You write that one group believes that the safety and security of Jews in the land of Israel is directly dependent on the safety and security of Palestinians. The other group believes that the safety and security of Jews in the land of Israel is directly dependent on the insecurity of Palestinians. So let's start off by thinking out loud for us what it's been like for you to engage your fellow Israelis over these 22 months since October 7th, and where you kind of fit within the spectrum of Israeli society.
Okay, that's a lot. So first of all, in the two groups that you mentioned, it's actually, maybe it wasn't exactly formulated the way that I would like it to be, but there are Israelis and Palestinians who believe that their security and prosperity is deeply dependent on the security and prosperity of the other. I call these the good guys. We are, at least on the Jewish side, very, very small. The ruling, really the prevailing ethos in Israel is that we need to maintain material and political superiority to be safe. Those are most of the people. These other people who I affiliate with really believe that true equality, true prosperity and security, the safety of my children, depend on equality. When people across the board feel respected and invested in the society, people tend to not be violent, at least not as much. Obviously, this doesn't solve all the sources of violence, but and that's, just a sea change that I don't know how it happens. In terms of me and Israeli society, I often sort of crack the joke, well, but me, I'm a crazy communist. Am I actually a communist? No, not in the classical sense of it. But in terms of where I am on the scale, I vote for the only explicitly Jewish Arab progressive party called Hadash. It is overwhelmingly, its membership is Arab. I don't know about overwhelming, but the vast majority. And it actually is sort of an heir to the old Israeli Communist Party. And one of the things that drives some Jews away from it is that they still use very much the iconography of a communist party. They have events with huge red flags and drums, and they don't sing the Internationale, which is the one part I would love. So what percentage of Jews vote for that? I can't tell you the exact percentage, but I can tell you this. Most Zionist Jews who consider themselves the left are the most vicious to me about it, because they feel that they have the only way to solve things, and that by voting for this other party, I'm throwing away my vote instead of supporting them to save the country and to save the project. Whereas they've been saying this my whole life, and the things have been getting worse. And they say that I'm being an idealist. I think I'm being strategic. Why? Because if that party, which currently has about 5 mandates, could get 10 mandates and was even 30% Jewish voters, then there could be no center-left coalition without them, and there would need to be concessions to a party that is truly devoted to equality.
So how has your own life been affected? I mean, have you lost friends? Are you facing hostility, abuse, ostracism? I mean, you probably want to say, oh, that's nothing compared to what others are suffering, but how has this affected you personally, and how has the last 2 years even changed you?
I'm only 32, so no, I'm much older than that. But how has it changed me? I'm exhausted and stressed all the time. And being where I am positioned emotionally means that I have trauma from both sides. According to recent statistical averages, every day, 27 children die in Gaza. In my name, on my watch, I vote here. I pay taxes here. I have a daughter who's finishing up her army service. I have a son who's preparing to go in, which I'm extremely ambivalent about, and we had long conversations about that. So have I lost friends? I've lost friends online, certainly. And I do take abuse online and in person from Israelis. There's one person who I'm daily at a dog park that's 10 minutes from me, which is a gorgeous place. I have a lovely dog. I take my computer, I write there. And, if I go earlier in the day, I actually do paid work. I work for a civil rights NGO right now. So, here's a nice little snapshot. The nicest guy with an English setter who knows a lot about dogs, and he's kind to everybody. And you can guess where this is already guess where this is leading. For his job, he runs a private daycare. He takes care of children all day long. Suddenly says to me, we should just kill them all.
Wow.
And I said, there are 1 million children in Gaza. And he was like, okay, well, if some of them want to stay and they're willing to behave themselves, and he this is a direct translation, and they're willing to be second-class citizens, then some of them can stay. And I looked at him and I'm like, you're a real Kahanist. I assume you guys know what Kahanism is, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you say a little bit there?
Our viewers might not know.
Kahanism. Yeah.
So Kahana was a radical right-wing rabbi from Brooklyn who first, in the 1980s, moved here and put together a party that was about expelling all non-Jews from Israel who didn't totally accept our supremacy, and creating a state according to traditional interpretations or some traditional interpretations of rabbinic law. He was banned from the Knesset because of a law that bans explicit racists. And his descendants are now running the government.
Yeah.
Smotrich is a Kahanist. Ben Gvir is a Kahanist.
Yeah.
You know, I can name a list of them. Many members, in my view, of Likud qualify as Kahanists, clearly. So I said, "You're a Kahanist?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm much more extreme than that." And he says to me,
Wow.
and he wasn't joking, "I'm a Hitlerist."
Wow.
And I just looked at him, and I refused to speak to him. I refused to sit down with him because I
Wow.
can't. He's the nicest guy in the world. I cannot sit down. And he's like, "Oh, so you don't accept me because I have differing opinions?" And I'm like, "This isn't a political disagreement. When you dehumanize 7 million people, you abdicate your humanity, it feels terrible for me to sit with you." And other people at the dog park, most of whom, the vast majority of whom find this anathema, would still say, "Why do you even go into politics?"
Hey, Ori, this brings us to another question.
Concern me.
So, Ori, if I can just jump back into something you said a minute ago.
I just want to finish because what Bruce read, my quote about that survey, it's those people I think are the problem. I don't think he's the problem. You know, if people who disagree with that and are willing to really think through what opposition to that means would disassociate from him as not admissible in polite society, like a Klansman, like a Hamas fighter who's an annihilist, like a neo-Nazi, if those very nice people wouldn't say, "Okay, but that's politics," and would actually stand up and understand what it means to accept such people in society, things would be different here. And those are the people who are not too troubled about the conditions that are definitively demonstrated in Gaza right now.
I guess, Ori, what I'm wondering is if 49% of the Israeli population is willing to say that peace will only come when the Palestinians disadvantaged, I guess you're sort of generalizing about that now. How far are they willing to go? What does it mean to have 49% the Palestinians be disadvantaged? I'm not sure I know what that means.
Okay, well, first of all, I think it's much more than 49%. And a lot of these people really think that they're on the left and they're benevolent. You know, I will push them. I mean, we call them liberal Zionists, and I will push them. But do you believe in full equality? And they say, absolutely yes. Except then they have their caveats. One of the big caveats is immigration law. Well, that's controlling demographics through the government.
Right.
I don't think you have full equality when you have that kind of immigration law. I am okay with and even support expedited paths to citizenship for diaspora Jews, but only on the condition that there's a parallel policy for diaspora Palestinians. Also, most of the land in Israel is not actually privately owned. Most of it is owned by a division of the government called the Israel Lands Administration. When you own a home here or an apartment in a building, you don't own the land underneath.
Oh.
The owner of the building has building rights on that land and owns the building. So in the distribution of land, when you need to add, okay, here it is in a snapshot. Since 1967, there are 12 or 13 new neighborhoods in Jerusalem that are almost exclusively for Jews. You'll find Palestinians, a few, living in them. Some of them, I think it's fair to call them settlements. But in the greater Jerusalem area, there are 12 to 13, I think, residential developments, neighborhoods for Jews. For Palestinians, there are Zero. And if you understand Palestinian culture, as Bruce does, for instance, you cannot get married unless you own a home. And often your broader family will contribute to setting that up. But if you can't develop new residential properties, then you can't get married and start a family. So, you know, the question is full equality, and liberal Zionists still have certain things that they will hold on to. But then they will be, and this is meaningful. The organization that I work for is a liberal Zionist organization. We have something called the Racism Crisis Center. We handle cases all the time on discrimination in employment, in services, and profiling, and even, you know, sexual harassment. We handled a case of a woman, a Palestinian citizen, who was returning from a 3-week vacation in Germany, and she was brought into a room when she re-entered the country, and she was interrogated about where she was, what she'd been doing, and then alone in the room with 3 security personnel, the guy starts saying, "How come you didn't travel with your husband? Aren't you supposed to travel with your husband in your culture?" And she was like, "No, and it's none of your business." She didn't say that, but she was like, "What a weird question." And wait for it. Then he says, "How many people were you intimate with in Germany?"
Oh.
Yeah. So when you ask me, you know, how bad will it get? First of all, it's way over. If you include the people, even at the organization I work for, the majority of whom still want to cling to certain Jewish privileges, but think that we can make ourselves ethical and benevolently, you know, sufficiently ethical and benevolent. Benevolence is a problem. Benevolence is not equality. Benevolence is asymmetrical. We ask for benevolence from God. We're not symmetrical with God. I am not benevolent to somebody on the bus who falls down and needs help. I am kind to them. I obey an ethical law to help them because they're hurt. I don't feel like I'm giving them grace. That's like the height of arrogance in both of our theologies. So how far will this go? I have stopped at this point predicting the future. The post that sort of went viral about 4 days after the 7th, you know, I actually said it was about anger, and it was listing all the things I was angry about, including what I saw coming. I said, I'm angry about the thousands of people who will die in Gaza over the next few weeks. It's been 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's tens of thousands.
Right.
And there are estimates that put it much higher. We can't know yet. So I stick with the conservative tens of thousands. Actually, you know, the Hamas health ministry figures are fairly conservative compared to others. And they have been borne out in the past. I don't think we're going to know for a long time, and we're not going to know exactly. But, you know, I for the first, you know, few months of the war, I was like, I told you this was going to happen. I told you so.
Yeah.
Even that view has been, you know, blown out of the water. I think a lot of it will depend on the international community. We are not going to save ourselves morally.
And Ori, that's where I kind of want to, if I can jump in really quickly here. You know,
Please.
A lot of us try to assign responsibility to Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition. In an American climate, by the way, that's kind of safe to do, because the immediate response to anything that we might try to say is, of course, you're being anti-Semitic and whatever. So if you blame Netanyahu, it's not as bad as blaming all of Israel, so to speak. But you seem to be indicating that there's a greater responsibility with Israel as a whole. So let me ask 2 questions then. Where do you assign responsibility, and what do you see as a solution? I think you're kind of intimating a little bit there that there's a bigger issue in terms of the solution. So
and this connects back to what's been my experience over the past 2 years. The first place I I assign responsibility, and it's somewhat, an intellectual position, I assign it to myself. There was a great ethical figure in modern Jewish theology. Rabbi wrote that not all are guilty, but all are responsible. I'm responsible. The Israeli electorate is responsible. People take me to task all the time for how come you're not talking about Hamas? Well, I'm not talking about Hamas because I'm not in Gaza. I don't have any, they aren't doing anything in my name. I am not giving them any material support like I am this regime as a citizen. I'm responsible for us, not for them. But I do think that they hold responsibility. I do
you think the United States holds some responsibility as well, though?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nothing would be happening like this without support of the US, Canada, the EU, and Australia.
Okay.
It's very clear. And the UK.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't be possible. I have been, for a very long time, supportive of an arms embargo. At this point, I think there need to be the strongest economic sanctions to just say stop. 27 children every single day. I wrote a post that was trying to make the point, because it's hard to visualize when it's all numbers.
Yeah.
27 children is basically the average size of a third grade class.
Yeah, exactly.
So picture
every
a
single
third grade
day.
classroom. There's somebody standing in front of the hamster cage. There are some kids that are working on an art project. Others are hearing a story. Some are filling out worksheets. Others are fidgeting. Others are, going and coming back from a third grade classroom. Now imagine them shriveled on the floor, breathing their last breath from hunger.
Every single day.
And imagine that tomorrow and the day after and the day after. And you still fund that school.
Ori,
So I absolutely think the international community bears responsibility.
Hey, David, let me interject really quickly, David, before you go. And that is, we want to thank you for watching here. If you're joining us on the live stream as well, feel free to interject comments in the comments box. We'll do our best to get to them. Obviously, we have a panel and we have all the questions that we want to ask as well. But we're going to look at your comments and get them there. So feel free to give us your comments, and we'll see if we can get Ori to answer some of them as well. So, David, go ahead.
Yeah, Ori, I'm curious, as we talk about portions of responsibility being borne by parts of Israeli society, I'm curious to know, is there any portion of Israeli society that is willing to share responsibility for what happened on October 7th? Realizing that you can't occupy a people indefinitely without seeing some kind of violent response to that occupation.
Well, yes, we are small. I don't know if I would use the term responsibility in the direct sense, but I do think the context is very important. It was right after October 7th when I think it was some high official in the UN said, well, this didn't come out of nowhere. And there was a huge immediate outcry to shut it down.
Yeah.
The very raising of context was shamed and silenced here. There are among us, but I'll tell you something, I'm much more specific about it. We voted for governments for over a decade that openly and publicly were handing suitcases of untraceable cash from Qatar to Hamas.
Yeah.
And we were doing it explicitly because it prevented reconciliation between the PA and Hamas, and that was meant to impede the possibility of any real political process. Smotrich himself, this is public quotation, called Hamas an asset At the same time, we were maintaining a draconian blockade that was hurting the citizens of Gaza. So if you're growing up in Gaza, and remember, about half of Gaza has lived their entire conscious lives under siege. They were caught between our funding of Hamas and our siege that was hurting the citizens. Obviously, there was going to be an explosion. Now, there's another level of responsibility here that isn't so much moral responsibility, but there's a lot bound up with it. October 7th could have been stopped, should have been stopped, could have been deterred and prevented. This government's policy totally ignored intelligence. There was total malpractice. So basically, they set up an early warning system and remote weapons on the Gaza border based on cellular technology, and then moved weapons and troops to the West Bank for what I consider very nefarious reasons. What was the problem? All Hamas had to do was to send drones with unsophisticated analog anti-tank weapons and take out those towers. There were spotters on the border who for months were reporting maneuvers and mobilization. And they were told by their superiors, you're our eyes, not our brains, and disregarded. Why? In part because these were women between 18 and 21 years old. And they were told this by male officers. One of them who was taken hostage, many were killed on the 7th. One who was taken hostage, a Jerusalemite whose family I know, when she was released, and even before that, her father reported this. He drove her all the way back from Jerusalem to her base and told her, given the stories she had been telling him, that he's amazed that she has the courage to go back. And she said, well, what if I'm kidnapped? He dropped her off, and she was in a tunnel in Gaza for over a year because she wasn't listened to. There are other also things that happened. It should not have happened. We had every capability to deter it and to stop it, even carrying on this crazy, cynical policy that victimized and humiliated Gazans between our support of Hamas and our blockade of not just imports. People think the blockade is just imports. It was export. So they couldn't sell their produce and their products.
Right.
They couldn't get them out of the country. They couldn't make a living. But the reason that I went through all of this is because there's another level of responsibility. Because anytime somebody says, we have to finish the war, we have to keep going, we have to take out Hamas, or Israel is under existential threat and no country will live that way. Well, if we could have stopped it on the 7th, we could stop the war right now and be completely safe.
Ori, I wondered if I could jump in.
We were on the 7th, and we could have stopped it then.
I wondered if I could ask a question now that we're talking about the army. We see daily evidence that IDF soldiers and bombers target civilians, non-combatants, journalists, medics, family members, children. We hear about different body parts of the weak being targeted by snipers. Whistleblowers are describing the crimes they've witnessed. And of course, Israel rejects all of these charges vehemently. Could you explain for us how the Israeli army works as part of Israeli society? And are the problems simply at the top, or is this also widespread in the trenches?
Okay, so I'm going to take your last point first. There are instances of it coming from the top. And I have an anecdote from a friend of mine's son from 2 weeks ago. He is in reserves, a senior medical officer. He runs a neuroscience firm And in the reserves, he's a medical officer. I think he's a major, or I guess it would be lieutenant colonel, not full colonel. He's one of those. His son, who's a good friend of my son's, was in, did not have a medical profile that was high enough to be in a combat unit, and worked really hard to get it raised so that he could be in the armored corps. He couldn't be in the infantry or a commando unit, but he could be in the armored corps. Why? Ethic of service. And some of this is not just a simulation. Ask yourself what happens if at midnight tonight there's an announcement that the IDF is disarming and decommissioning within the next 24 hours. There are 7.4 million Jews here. How do you think we'd fare within the next week? How do you think our Palestinian and Druze citizens would fare? It would be bloodshed on an unimaginable level. So when Israelis say, well, it really is defense, there still is something to that. It's also an army that spends, I think, over 60% of its resources on maintaining the occupation in the West Bank. So is it the Israel Occupation Force? Yes. Is it the Israel Defense Force? Yes. Now, he works very hard to get, I know I'm not very good at concision. If brevity is the soul of wit, then I'm a dullard. But the story goes like this. He worked very hard to get himself into an armored unit. Because he's in an ethos of a fairly privileged sector of society that really has this idea of obligation to serve the society and to maintain its security. Some of this has a dark side to it, but some of it really is an ethic of service that people are raised with. So he's in Gaza a few weeks ago, and he's sitting in his tank, and there are two tanks next to each other. And they are watching a no man's land area. And a woman with some children enters the area. So they report what's going on. They describe it. The battalion commander tells them to fire. So the kid, and again, these are kids. The gunner in the tank next to my friend's kids presses the button. Last I heard, he hasn't spoken yet. My friend's kid was watching through sights in the tank right next to his. One of the kids was basically disintegrated. I mean, we're talking about a tank shell. He was due for a week furlough, and he called his father. And his father jumped in his civilian vehicle, but in uniform with his ranks, drove into Gaza, which is really both a brave thing to do and something you're not supposed to do, to get his son, drove him straight to the beach in Tel Aviv to sit and talk to him. And his son says, I'm not going back. Sign me up to talk to the psychiatric officer, because I'm not going back to that. So the question is, does that come from the battalion commander? Yes. Does it come from the kid who pressed the button? Yes. But I honestly can't tell you, if I were a 19-year-old kid and the battalion commander said fire, that I wouldn't in that moment fire.
Right.
I think most would. It's a conditioned response. There is something called a command that is explicitly illegal, that you are actually culpable if you fulfill it. So for instance, if you have a child on his knees and a gun to his head and the officer says shoot, and you shoot, you go to prison if it's exposed. But that's not the situation. He's sitting in a tank. There's a no man's land that they're supposed to then there are lower level officers and troops who are doing terrible things. There are also soldiers who are doing their best to act decently and endangering themselves for this. It's a large operation. The only way you're putting, okay, so there's a line in the Mishnah, the sort of one of the foundational rabbinic texts. It's part of the Talmud, basically. In the Mishnah, it says, in a place where there are no humans, strive to be human. The strive to be human doesn't say be human. There's no humanity in Gaza right now. And some people are trying. And some people are testifying. And some people are beginning to refuse. But the abuses are real. There's no question. The testimonies are sound. Many of the testimonies are coming from people who are testifying in great pain because they feel like their entire ethos they're betraying. And their views of their own society are crumbling.
Ori, take us up the chain of command a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure that you have, clear vision or access to what's going on at the highest levels, but between Netanyahu and his cabinet and then the various commanders at the top, what do you see as their agenda, particularly as it's being expressed in the last couple of weeks? What's the plan at the top?
We've been asking that since October 8th. And it's very clear that some people have a very clear agenda. If you've been watching the news in the past week, there has been this declaration of we are now going to occupy, potentially permanently, all of Gaza City, which is a huge area, what's left of it. The chief of staff has come out publicly against the operation. And there are people in the government trying to fire him over this. He also has accepted the orders from the civilian authorities and has prepared a plan, but he said this could end up killing all the hostages. The amount of manpower and material may not be sustainable. So many to most of the security and military experts in the country think this should have been ended a long time ago. Why is it not? What I was saying about security, well, the coalition is being controlled by the Kahanists, most of whom didn't serve in the army. Ben-Gvir was not taken into the army because he'd been convicted of racist incitement. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and members of their parties have said they will leave the coalition if there's a ceasefire. And they say, because we need to absolutely defeat Hamas. What's the problem? They have an open messianic ideology that first we conquer the entire biblical land of Israel, and then we throw out democracy and have a theocratic rabbinic state. This isn't conspiracy theory.
It just sounds so
This
parallel to what you
they
find.
have a huge network. So you have these people who have not served in the army, many of whom have kids who don't serve in the army, who are forcing us to continue this savage operation and using arguments of security when really it's about their messianic ideology. And the fact is there are militarists in the government who also actually buy the security argument. But I truly believe if the government wasn't being controlled by those two parties, because if they leave the coalition, there's elections. If the government wasn't being controlled by them, we would have had a ceasefire a while ago and a deal for hostages. I truly believe that. But a few days, no, it was like 3 weeks after October 7th, people were asking, so what's the end game? What's the vision here? And a government official actually said, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah.
Ori,
And a lot of
the
them still haven't
irony of the
gotten
whole
that far,
thing,
but
it seems.
I
it seems
remember
to me-
posting about that and being appalled.
Ori,
Go
the,
ahead, Gary. Go ahead,
the
Gary.
irony of the
You
whole
are
thing
going
is
to
that
commit troops and endanger countless civilians, and you have no vision of what you want to accomplish? That's the height
Yeah.
of irresponsibility.
Gary, go ahead.
well,
We
I don't know.
haven't
Let's go
gotten
ahead. David has some questions. Let's go ahead, David. I'm fine.
Well, I've heard reports, Ori, that there are the beginnings of small anti-war demonstrations happening in places like Tel Aviv. Are you beginning to see the resurrection of a peace camp in Israel?
This is complicated. First of all, they're not also small and they're not also new. There
Okay.
have been anti-war demonstrations focused on the hostages for a long time, which I found very frustrating. That it's all about the hostages. And then a little ways into it, people started appending, and the terrible suffering in Gaza, in those kinds of terms, just appending at the end. About 2 months ago, there started to be more and more people who go to these demonstrations. And I go to demonstrations regularly here in Jerusalem. I live a 15-minute walk from the prime minister's residence. And I'm there at least once a week. And there's a bit of a division. There's the anti-war because stop the war. And there's the ceasefire to rescue the hostages, which is bigger. It's bigger. There's a huge debate happening on my Facebook page right now because I simply posted, if we cared as much about non-combatants in Gaza as we do about the hostages, ellipsis, ... And it caused outrage, mostly because people were thinking about care only as affective care as opposed to moral care and policy care. So I'm writing a follow-up right now that I hope to post tomorrow, but it will be long-winded. The question of a peace camp. Okay. I know that this is a religious group, but I really have no way of saying this other than the peace camp in Israel was always sort of bullshit. Why? Because it goes back to, are you for full equality or not? Yitzhak Rabin, the great, like people still say, if only he hadn't been assassinated, he was not in favor of a state. Nobody has proposed a two-state solution is two co-equal, fully independent states. No one.
Yeah.
Actually, the person who probably got closest was, and he opened by saying he's calling for negotiations immediately. Remember, this is while he was funding Hamas to prevent reconciliation with the PA so there could be negotiations. So immediate negotiations with no red lines. And then for 25 minutes, he laid out red lines. And what he described is, we get to determine how much weaponry your police force has. We control all your external borders. We control your airspace. We control not only military treaties, but economic treaties we co-sign to. It's not a state.
Right.
And the peace camp has made a hero out of Rabin. You know, the two-state solution for most, if you push them like you push them on full equality, is not really two states. The state that they are envisioning for Palestinians is not what they would consider an adequate state for themselves. And that's where we go back to Do you believe that your security and prosperity is dependent on the security and prosperity of Palestinians or on their insecurity? And then being benevolent to them, and hopefully then they grow up and they learn not to be hateful and violent, and they change their textbooks, and they appreciate us and they're grateful. Which to me, sounds like, when I was teaching, I taught Frederick Douglass's narrative of the life of a slave, which I think should be required reading for anybody to graduate high school in the US. And what people don't understand, they think it's just an autobiography. When you teach it, you show students, I don't know how many of you have read it, but the entire project is to debunk the contentions of Northern liberals that some slavery is actually good for the slaves. There's benevolent slavery. Yes, there were different degrees of savagery.
Hey, or if I can interject really quickly, it's getting dark in Israel and Jerusalem where you are, and we're actually having trouble seeing you on your camera. So I'm not sure if you have some light that you can add to your screen there. So
I have a little bit of light.
right. And Gary, I think you're next.
Although there's something poetic about me speaking from the darkness. Let me try something.
I'm not sure, but we want to go there.
Or maybe just go indoors.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Well,
Gary, you want to interject?
so maybe if the light could face him instead.
Truth be told, the lighting indoors isn't that great here either.
Okay.
That's
I'm
great.
fighting with my landlord about it, but here. It's better?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Ori.
I haven't been pretty for 35 years, so.
So, Ori, here's a question that stays with me a lot. Those of us who work in ethics and theology, we have always looked to Judaism to give us probably the most profound texts, the most profound thoughts about what our ethical guidelines ought to be. Judaism is a profoundly ethical faith. And so I know that, and I've always admired that. But then I see the present devastation of Gaza, and I think to myself, is Judaism not at play in this Israeli activity? But then I think, oh, well, no, of course, it has to be. What has happened here to the great Jewish ethical traditions?
Wow, that's a huge question. If you think my answers have been long-winded until now, I have no idea how to do this, but I will say that the Judaism that ethical Protestants, let's use it that way, because I don't like liberal, but ethical Protestants, the Judaism that is appreciated in your community is a particular view of Judaism. I read Christian texts and admire them through the lens of being Jewish. If you read Matthew, which you all do, probably more often than I do, there have been few people who have expounded Isaiah's social doctrine as effectively as the Gospel of Matthew. And a lot of it is completely coherent with Jewish ideas. But like there is Christian violence that can be rooted in Christian sources, because Christianity is a broad and deep and rich and heterogeneous tradition, so too is Judaism. Even if you just read what you'd call the Pentateuch. Is that how you guys say it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Anyway, the Torah in the sense of the first 5 books.
Right.
If you just read there. So for instance, I'm chanting this week's reading on Shabbat. And it has a beautiful verse, and I'm translating in my head on the fly, that God is the lover of the orphan and the widow, and loves the stranger / foreigner, and then says what is repeated more than anything else in the Torah, and you will love the stranger because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. That we all stand up and cheer. And it's particularly profound for Jews on the left, and I think many, many Bible reading Christians right now in the US, given what's going on with ICE. It's a direct violation of that. But for Jews, with the idea that we are taught to understand ourselves as having come out of being oppressed strangers in Egypt, it's very profound. What's the problem? The problem is the last few verses in the entire 7-part reading are all about, and you're going to go into the land, and wherever you step will belong to you. And it will be from Egypt up to the Euphrates. And you will triumph over all these nations that are larger and mightier than you, and they will fear you. So where's Judaism in this? Well, you know, the people running the government see those last verses as their program.
So let's just take a very simple.
Many Jews who are much more believing than I am, who are, and also wrestle with those last verses and are absolutely against that program. So where's religion? Religion is heterogeneous.
So what
just
does
as in
the
Christianity,
Israeli
just so
right
in,
do with that portion of Deuteronomy that you're reading, with the love for the stranger, love for the alien? What does the Israeli right do with that?
Well, it's not just the Israeli right, it's the entire tradition of Jewish and rabbinic hermeneutics. The entire history of it deals with some of these things. And I think there are ways of reconciling them to either direction. You know, what does it mean that these will be your borders and these will be, you know, yours? What does it being yours mean? You know, is it a property deed? Ultimately, I'm sort of against that kind of apologetics. What the major apologetics of the Smotrich people will be is that the first verse, the one that we're comfortable with, that we find inspiring and nourishing, that talks about individuals. And as long as they're not your enemy, you should indeed be ethical towards them. But as collective threats, then you should annihilate them and take their land. And indeed, the fringe of the far right is now throwing around things publicly that they never have before, that we should settle southern Lebanon. Based on these.
Ori, we thank you so much for this conversation. This has been phenomenal. We got one or two more questions here, but
so I don't know if
we want to remind everyone.
I don't want it to be satisfying.
Yeah.
We want to remind everyone that, of course, if you subscribe to the Christian Forum on Israel-Palestine YouTube page, you'll be alerted to any upcoming events that we might have. Of course, determinedtruth.com will be a place that you can go as well to stay tuned to any of these events that we have going on. We have a live stream coming up next week, which we'll tell you more about in a few minutes. But Ori, let me kind of right now, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good in terms of where this is going. I don't think this looks good for Israel either. Do you think Israel is going to succeed in cleansing Gaza? You know, where are the Gazans going to go? Is Israel going to continue by annexing the West Bank? You know, I mean, what do you think the future holds for this conversation and for Israel as well?
Okay, again, I have really backed off the prophetics. I think a lot of it depends on the international community. If you care about both Gazans and Palestinians on the West Bank and Palestinian citizens of Israel and Israeli Jews.
Exactly.
You should be pounding on your representatives' doors, demanding an immediate arms embargo and sanctions for an immediate ceasefire. Do I think that would help with the makeup of this Congress? Probably not. I'm a dual citizen. I vote in U.S. elections, although I don't think I'd vote for Congress anymore. I don't think I can. But I vote for president every 4 years. Do I think we'll annex the West Bank? I think if the international community blinks, we will. I think this is where the people pushing to annex it, and I just have to throw in a caveat. A lot of people's great hope right now is that Naftali Bennett comes back into politics, which he's planning to do, and that he's the next prime minister. Naftali Bennett was the first sitting minister in an Israeli cabinet to propose formally annexing the West Bank. Think about that. So yes, I'm speaking to you from the dark.
Well,
I think they will. I think it's also self-defeating for them, because if you annex, then you're really formalizing. You can't. There's like as problematic as the denials of apartheid are right now.
Yeah,
they're impossible if you annex the territory, because you don't have the ruse of temporariness that absolves you of responsibility for civil and human rights. Well, civil rights. I mean, human rights, nothing it absolves you, but they don't care. What will happen with the cleansing of Gaza? Really, and I hate using cleansing because to me it still sounds like a good term. The destruction of Palestinian Gaza, the obliteration of Palestinian Gaza. Will that happen? The logistics seem really, really difficult. Netanyahu, in his press conference earlier in the week, said, of course, it's not genocide, because if we wanted to commit genocide, it would take us half an hour. That's ultimately true. You know, nobody really denies that we have nuclear weapons.
Yeah. But it's easier to annihilate them over the course of time, because then you don't have to worry about the accusation of genocide, because you can say, well, see, if we wanted to genocide you, we could have done it quickly. So let's do it slowly, and then we don't have to worry about the accusation.
Absolutely. And the way that that's backed up is that fairly early in the war, Smotrich was quoted, and you can look it up. None of what I'm sharing is stuff that isn't public. Smotrich said that he thinks it would be morally justified to purposely starve to death 2.2 million people, but the world won't let us do it. We can't drop nuclear bombs on Gaza because the world will not tolerate it. And we know we can't go that far. So the question is, how far is the world going to let these people go? And the question is, how far will we go before the Israeli, electorate, those nice people in the center who really are empathetic, when will they stand? Look, there is no question. By the way, there's a piece in Haaretz from earlier this week, or from last week, I forget who wrote it, that says, how can we just go on when we know this many people are starving? And is all about that. Read like something I might write. We could stop it tomorrow. If we shut down the economy, absolutely, until it stops. If even 100,000 people would join a genuine hunger strike in front of the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv and in front of the Knesset, it would be untenable. And we're not doing that. And I've been saying this for over a year. We could stop it. These nice rallies where we hear from families of hostages and hold up their pictures are not going to stop the war. We need actual disruption, and we're not doing it. So the question is, if we drop an atomic bomb, if the world would let us, would the Israeli electorate stand up? I have no idea. This will go on and go as far as the international community allows it to.
That sounds like a possible place for us to end for today, although Ori, if you're willing, we might like to pull you back into the conversation going forward for updates. We are grateful for your time. I always feel smarter when I'm in a room with you and or in a Zoom with you. So thank you for
As opposed to my
yeah,
children who
your
do the opposite.
thank you for your candor, your bravery, and your time with us today, even if metaphorically and literally you're in the darkness. I want to just remind viewers that we've got another event coming up in a week. It's on checking the date, it's on the 20th. So that's a week from today, I think, with Victoria Rose, a British surgeon who's spent at least 3 tours in Gaza working there as a surgeon. And she has stories to tell from her experience. So that'll be advertised on social media for August 20th. Other than that, Rob, is there anything else we need to say? Thanks again, Ori, and thanks all of you and all who are listening or will be listening to this going forward. Take care.